Hey everyone! Tonight, we're kicking off with the incredible resilience and, let's say, creative discomfort tolerance of the Viking people, who somehow managed to survive Scandinavian winters without central heating. Before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. The winter in medieval Scandinavia was one of the greatest adversities faced by the Vikings, lasting for long months and bringing extremely harsh conditions. During this period, the Scandinavian region transformed into a vast landscape of snow and ice, with temperatures that could drop below 30 degrees C, especially in the northernmost regions. Darkness also prevailed as during winter, the sun barely rose above the horizon, creating short days and endless nights. Challenges with food. During the winter months, the Vikings faced serious difficulties ensuring food supply for the population, with snow covering the fields and making hunting and fishing difficult. Food sources became extremely limited. Food preservation. To ensure there was enough food for the winter months, the Vikings relied on food preservation methods such as drying, smoking, and salting. Game meat and fish were preserved so they could be consumed throughout the colder months. Grain storage. Grain cultivation was crucial, and much of the harvest was stored in barns to guarantee supply. However, these stocks could be affected by prolonged periods of heavy snow, which hindered transportation and grain preservation. Hunting and fishing. During winter, hunting and fishing became more difficult due to the intense cold and snow. The Vikings had to adapt their hunting tactics, often using traps to catch animals such as deer, bears, and small mammals. Challenges with shelter. The extreme weather conditions required the Vikings to be well prepared to endure the intense cold. House construction. Viking houses were designed to retain heat, with thick wooden walls and roofs made of grass or straw, helping to keep the interior warm. Additionally, the use of fires in the center of the homes was essential to warm the inhabitants, as wood was an abundant and easily accessible resource. Clothing and accessories. Clothing was adapted to the severe climate. The Vikings wore animal pelts, such as bears, wolves, and deer, as well as woolen clothes to stay warm. Fur cloaks, thick boots, and gloves were common to protect against the extreme cold. Firewood supply. With constant snowfall, gathering firewood became a challenging but essential task for heating and food preparation. Viking villages often stored large amounts of firewood to survive the winter, and families who owned forests around their properties had a significant advantage. Social and cultural life in winter. During the winter, Viking communities had to deal with confinement, as mobility between villages was restricted due to snow and ice. Meetings and parties. To combat isolation, Viking communities maintained an active social life within their villages. Parties and celebrations like Yule were ways to keep morale high. During these celebrations, stories of heroes and gods were told around the fire, strengthening the oral culture that preserved Nordic traditions and mythology. Military training. Winter was also a time for training. Young Vikings spent the cold months practicing combat techniques and improving their navigation skills, as the intense cold didn't stop them from preparing for the next raiding season or commercial voyages. How the Vikings built their houses to withstand the cold. Viking houses, also known as longhouses, were designed to withstand the harsh Scandinavian climate. The main concern for the Vikings when building their homes was thermal insulation, as temperatures during the winter were extremely low. The longhouses were built with a robust wooden frame, usually made of oak or pine, as these woods were abundant and durable. The walls were constructed with logs or wooden planks, which were often treated to prevent damage from moisture and the cold. In addition, the houses had slanted roofs, typically covered with straw or wooden shingles, which helped retain internal heat. The slanted roof also helped prevent snow accumulation, ensuring it didn't become an excessive weight that could damage the structure of the house. Use of wood, moss, and other materials for insulation. Insulation was one of the Vikings' greatest concerns, and for this, they used a combination of natural materials. The walls of the longhouses were usually filled with moss between the wooden planks, which helped block the wind and prevent cold air from entering. Moss was widely used because of its availability in the Nordic regions and its natural insulating properties. Besides moss, The Vikings also used other natural materials, such as earth, to fill gaps in the walls and protect against wind and moisture. Some houses had layers of clay or mud between the wooden walls, providing an additional barrier against the cold and humidity. How the houses were heated, emphasizing the fireplaces and stoves. Viking houses were primarily heated through central fireplaces or stoves, which were installed in the center of the longhouses. These stoves were fueled by wood, which was an abundant source of fuel in the Scandinavian forests. The fire not only provided heat, but also served as a crucial source of light during the long winter months, when the days were short. The heating system was rudimentary but effective. The fire in the stove heated the surrounding area, and the warmth spread throughout the space. Additionally, Viking houses were designed to retain heat for longer. The thick roof and walls helped create a heat chamber, where the internal temperature remained relatively stable, even when external temperatures were extremely low. In some longhouses, the smoke from the stoves was diverted through rudimentary chimneys, which allowed for air circulation without the smoke invading the living space. This also helped prevent condensation and mold, which were common issues in very humid and cold environments. These building and heating methods allowed the Vikings to survive the severe winter cold, making their houses functional and resilient to the harsh climate of medieval Scandinavia. Typical Viking clothing: furs and wool. The Vikings, being excellent hunters and fishermen, used abundant natural materials to make their clothes. Animal furs, such as those from wolves, elk, deer, and bears, were highly valued because they provided a thick layer that offered thermal insulation. These furs were skillfully worked, creating coats and tunics that could be worn over woolen garments for extra protection. In addition, wool was one of the most commonly used materials. Sheep were raised by the Vikings not only for their meat and pelts, but also for their thick wool, ideal for knitting and spinning clothes that were resistant to the cold. Woolen tunics and pants were essential for keeping the body warm during long journeys. Layering clothing to retain heat. To ensure effective protection against extreme cold, the Vikings used a layering system in their clothing. This not only helped insulate the body from the biting wind, but also allowed them to adjust their level of warmth as needed. The base layer, close to the skin, was usually made of wool or linen, materials that absorbed moisture and retained the body's heat. Over this, the Vikings would wear a thicker intermediate layer, such as a fur coat or woolen tunic. The upper layers, made of animal furs and even leather, were used to resist wind and rain, ensuring that the heat trapped by the lower layers was maintained. This layering system was crucial for survival in such hostile environments, allowing the Vikings to adapt to different climatic conditions, such as snowstorms and freezing winds. Use of cloaks and hats to protect from the cold wind. The cutting wind was one of the Vikings' greatest enemies during winter. To protect themselves from the gusts, they wore heavy cloaks, often made from furs, which covered their shoulders, arms, and part of their legs. These cloaks were wide and could be adjusted to cover the entire body, creating a barrier against the cold. Hats were another essential piece of Viking clothing. Often made from fur, wool, or leather, the hats were designed to cover the head and ears, areas vulnerable to intense cold. They wore models with wide brims or even long strips of fur to protect the neck and lower face. Additionally, woolen hoods were commonly sewn into tunics, providing an extra layer of protection. Ice fishing. Ice fishing was a common practice during the coldest months. The Vikings would drill through the thick ice on lakes and rivers with metal and wooden tools to catch fish. To prevent the hole from closing, they used ropes and thin cords to tie up the fish immediately after capture. Ice fishing was not only a way to guarantee fresh food, but also an essential survival skill during the months when open waters were frozen. Game meat and smoked fish, essential for survival. Game meat. Game meat, one of the main sources of protein, was fundamental to the Viking diet during winter. The animals they hunted were butchered, and their meat was processed in various ways: salted, smoked, or dried. Venison, elk, and pork were especially appreciated, not only for their flavor but also for their durability. Hunting provided a dense and energetic protein source, vital to sustain the Vikings in their daily activities during the winter. Smoked fish. Fish was another indispensable food in the Viking diet. After capture, the fish would be smoked over fires made from dry wood. ensuring that the food could be stored for long periods. Smoked fish was not only an excellent source of protein and omega-3, but also helped provide the essential nutrients the Vikings needed to stay healthy during the winter months. Fish was also a valuable food on sea voyages, as it could be easily stored and transported. The role of animals in Viking winters. The Vikings used sled dogs to facilitate transport in regions covered by snow and ice. These dogs were crucial during the winter, as they were more agile and adapted to pull sleds through difficult terrain. They helped transport heavy loads between distant villages, as well as assist the Vikings in their commercial journeys or even military raids. Adaptation to the cold. Sled dogs were especially adapted to the harsh climate, with dense fur that protected them from the extreme cold. Hunting. In addition to transport, the dogs were also used to assist in hunting. With their keen senses, they helped track wild animals, such as moose and bears, which were essential for the Vikings' food supply during the winter. Horses for transport and defense. Horses were another vital resource in winter, especially for Vikings living in more mountainous or difficult terrain. While not as efficient as dogs in deep snow, horses were essential for movement in less frozen areas and for transporting large quantities of supplies. Use in hunting and defense. Horses were not only used for transport but also played an important role in hunting and defense missions. In times of danger, the Vikings could ride their horses to patrol the area and protect themselves from invasions. Support for trade. Horses were also used to transport goods and hunting trophies, facilitating trade between villages and ensuring the supply of food and other essential items. Protection of villages. In winter, when the weather made survival even more challenging, the Vikings depended on their animals to protect the villages from potential attacks. While sled dogs and horses helped with transport, other animals, such as guard dogs, were used to watch over the entrances of the villages. Guard dogs, large dogs, known for their courage and loyalty, were tasked with guarding the village boundaries, alerting the Vikings to the approach of enemies or wild animals. Defense against predators. Winter increased the scarcity of food, causing predators such as wolves and bears to approach villages in search of food. The presence of dogs and horses helped deter these predators and protect the inhabitants. Viking cold survival strategies. Fire was the Vikings' primary survival tool during such a harsh winter. To maintain warmth and safety, they used fire inside their homes and in other open spaces. Viking houses were constructed in a way that concentrated heat in one central location, the hall or central room. In this area, a large fireplace or oven was used not only to heat the space, but also to cook and light the house. In addition to indoor fireplaces, the Vikings were experts at making campfires outdoors to warm up during travels or hunts. The use of wood, peat, and moss as fuel helped create fire even in humid and snowy conditions. The fire also served to melt snow and produce drinking water, as well as keep animals at bay. Viking tip. They carried heated stones from the fire, known as heat stones, which were placed near their bodies to warm their fur clothing and keep them warm during the night. How the Vikings dealt with the danger of snowstorms and long nights. Snowstorms were one of the greatest challenges faced by the Vikings, who constantly needed to adapt to the hostile environment. During a snowstorm, visibility was nearly zero, and strong winds could destroy shelters and scatter food. To survive these extreme conditions, the Vikings created temporary shelters and used animal skin tents for protection. They also covered their faces with furs to avoid frostbite and made sure their hands and feet were protected with fur gloves and wool-lined boots. During the long polar nights, when the sun barely appeared in the sky, the length of the nights could be oppressive. The Vikings knew how to use this darkness, not only to rest, but also to engage in activities that kept their bodies warm, such as sword and axe training, as well as dancing and singing around the fire, which also helped lift spirits and combat despair. Viking tip. During these long nights, food was crucial. They prioritized calorie-dense foods like game meat, smoked fish, and grains to maintain energy and body heat. The psychological strength to endure extreme cold, and the myths related to Viking endurance. The Vikings' mental resilience was part of their strategy to survive the extremes. Intense cold, lack of light, and harsh conditions were not only physical challenges, but also mental ones. Mental resilience was essential, and the Vikings had a strong culture of honor and courage that motivated them to overcome difficulties. The myth that Vikings were immune to the cold was propagated due to their appearance and unshakable behavior. The image of warriors who never trembled in the face of harsh winter spread, but in reality, the Vikings used practical techniques, such as wearing appropriate clothing, building well-constructed shelters, and making campfires. They also believed that the Norse gods, such as Thor, the god of thunder, and Skadi, the goddess of winter, protected them during their travels in frozen regions, giving them extra faith to face the cold with courage. Superstition and rituals related to extreme cold were common among the Vikings, with festivals and celebrations for the goddess Skadi, who represented resistance to winter and suffering. These strategies formed the foundation of Viking survival in the relentless winter of Scandinavia. Combining practical skills, strong psychological culture, and the protection of spiritual beliefs, the Vikings were able to thrive in one of the harshest climates on the planet. Viking community life in winter. During the harsh Scandinavian winters, survival depended on how Viking communities worked together. The severe weather, with freezing temperatures and long nights, created immense challenges for everyone. Viking villages were made up of family groups that, throughout the winter, had to join forces to face these challenges. Daily tasks such as hunting, fishing, storing food, ensuring the supply of firewood to heat homes were carried out collaboratively. Each person, regardless of age or position, played a crucial role in maintaining cohesion and survival. The collaboration between families ensured that there was always enough food, warmth in the homes, and above all, a sense of solidarity. The importance of winter feasts for community morale. Winter, with its darkness and intense cold, could be depressing and desolate, but the Vikings kept morale high with social events like feasts. These feasts were important occasions where the entire community gathered to share the year's harvests and hunts, celebrate past victories, and strengthen the bonds between village members. The large fire in the center of the homes or communal spaces provided heat and light, while the tables were filled with meat, fish, bread, drinks such as mead and beer. For the Vikings, these moments were not only a way to keep the body warm, but also to nourish the soul. It was through these gatherings that friendships were strengthened and the community was prepared for the challenges of winter. During the feasts, tales of bravery were told, legends were shared, and teachings were passed down, uniting the people around a common goal of survival. Community meetings and strengthening the collective spirit. In addition to feasts, community meetings played a vital role in Viking life during the winter. These meetings were times when the elders and leaders of the community would come together to discuss essential matters such as food distribution, defense strategies, and the organization of winter tasks. They also served as spaces for conflict resolution and promoting collective well-being. During these gatherings, the community reinforced the importance of mutual cooperation and supporting one another. For the Vikings, the collective spirit was essential to facing the adversities of winter. Every decision made in the meetings was aimed at benefiting everyone, and the leaders were responsible for maintaining peace, harmony, and efficiency in carrying out the task. Moreover, these meetings also served as a way to keep the community's history alive, passing on traditions and narratives that strengthened the Viking identity. Winter mythology and the Norse gods. Winter, with its dark and freezing days, was a fundamental part of Viking life, being much more than just a season. For them, the cold and darkness held deep meaning, often connected to the myths and legends of Norse gods and creatures. Norse mythology was immersed in this symbolism, with mythological figures directly tied to winter, providing courage and strength to face the challenges of this time. Hel, the goddess of winter and death. The goddess Hel is a central figure in Norse mythology and is associated with the world of the dead, ruling over the realm of the dead, also called Hel. She is the daughter of Loki, the trickster god, and the giantess Angrboda. Hel has a unique appearance, with half of her body in decay and the other half intact, reflecting her connection to death, symbol of coldness and desolation. Hel's realm is a dark, cold, and hopeless place. much like the wintry landscapes of Scandinavia. In many stories, Hel's presence was seen as the personification of the merciless winter, where darkness and unrelenting cold seemed endless. Influence on festivities. The Vikings believed that by making offerings to Hel and other deities, they could ensure a good harvest and protection against the dangers of winter. Stories about her helped face the fear of death, bringing a sense of control over death and what would come after life. Ymir, the ice giant and the creation of the world. Ymir, the primordial giant, is a central figure in the creation of the world in Norse mythology. According to legends, he emerged from the chaos of ice and fire at the beginning of time. From Ymir, the gods created the world and humans. He is often associated with ice and cold, essential elements of winter. The ice giant. Ymir was the prototype of frozen chaos and brute strength, and his existence was directly tied to the frozen world. He was so gigantic that his body, when killed by the gods, was used to create the earth, transforming the primordial cold into something structured, but still with the essence of winter. Reflection on cold. Ymir also symbolizes the eternal struggle between cold, represented by the ice giants, and heat, represented by the gods, a conflict that reflected the difficulties the Vikings faced in enduring the rigors of winter. The gods' victory over Ymir represented, in a way, a promise that spring and light would eventually return, offering hope in the midst of darkness. The role of stories and legends in courage during the winters. Mythological stories were not just for entertainment, but also a means of strengthening the courage and resilience of the Vikings during harsh winters. Each tale conveyed lessons about the struggle against uncontrollable forces of nature and the inevitability of death, teaching the Vikings to persevere in times of adversity. Transmission of wisdom and courage. Legends about Hel and Wyre, for example, helped the Vikings face natural elements with courage. Winter, with its endless nights and food scarcity, was a period of immense difficulty. However, stories of gods and legends helped keep the warrior spirit alive, encouraging them to endure. Winter rituals. During the long winter months, Viking communities gathered around the fire to hear these stories. Winter feasts and celebrations were a way to keep morale high, celebrating the struggle against the cold, and reinforcing the idea that life continued despite adversity. These gatherings were also an opportunity to pass down values of courage, strength, and endurance. Winter mythology as a means of overcoming. Mythological stories had the power to transform the perception of winter, which could be seen as a season of pure adversity, into a time of spiritual and physical strengthening. The connection to figures like Hel and Wyre reminded the Vikings that, even in the worst conditions, they were capable of resisting and surviving. Mysticism and hope. Norse legends often draw parallels between winter and death. But they also speak of rebirth. The sun may disappear for months, but it always returns, much like the natural cycle of life and death. This gave the Vikings a sense that, no matter how difficult the winter, there would always be a new season of warmth, light, and prosperity. Viking navigation during winter. The Vikings were master navigators and developers of advanced techniques for traveling the seas, even during the harshest winters. Here are some of the essential approaches they used during their expeditions in the coldest months. Use of the sun and the North Star. During winter, the Vikings needed precise navigation methods to orient themselves in unknown and icy seas. The sun, even on short and weak days, served as a reference point. On moonless nights, they used the North Star, which pointed directly north and guided them toward their destinations. Trees and local geography. In addition to the stars and the sun, the Vikings were very adept at observing environmental conditions. They could use the shape of the coastline, the characteristics of ocean currents, and even the direction in which trees leaned due to the prevailing wind to orient themselves. In some regions, they relied on small islands as landmarks to confirm their position. Shipbuilding and preparation for the cold. The severe cold and icy waters were not obstacles for the Vikings due to the robust construction of their ships. Viking vessels such as the famous Drakkar were made to withstand these extreme conditions. Drakar and longships. The construction of Viking ships was designed for flexibility and resilience. Made from strong wood with rounded bottoms, these ships could navigate both shallow waters and rough seas, allowing for quick travel even in frozen waters. Their long linen sails were easier to handle and ensured speed, essential for overcoming the cold winds. Sealing against the cold. To ensure the ships weren't damaged by water or ice, the Vikings used natural sealants such as animal fat and pitch to cover the boat seam. This not only helped to keep the ships resistant, but also contributed to preventing seawater from weakening the structure. Overcoming extreme cold. Survival techniques for expeditions. Viking expeditions in winter required more than navigation skills. Survival in freezing environments was a priority. The Vikings' approach to overcoming the cold was ingenious, aimed at maximizing effectiveness during long journeys. Survival clothing. To withstand the extreme cold, the Vikings wore layers of clothing made from animal furs, wool, and leather. The furs provided natural insulation that protected against snow and biting winds, while the leather was used to protect the extremities and prevent water from seeping in. Campfires and heat. During stops on their expeditions, the Vikings would light campfires or use portable stoves to keep warm. They also had methods of cooking food that not only provided nutrition, but also helped maintain warmth in their temporary homes or camps. Navigation during snowstorms and icy seas. One of the greatest challenges the Vikings faced during winter expeditions was navigating through snowstorms and icy seas. To address this, they developed techniques that made use of the winds and open sea navigation. Reading the wind. The Vikings were experts at identifying and using the winds to their advantage, even in adverse conditions. They knew exactly how to adjust their sails and take advantage of tailwinds, which allowed them to continue moving during storms. Instinct and local knowledge. When traveling through unfamiliar regions, the Vikings relied heavily on their instincts, combined with knowledge passed down from generation to generation about local currents and winds. When visibility was almost zero due to snowstorms, their ability to navigate by feel became even more crucial. The importance of expeditions to Viking culture. Viking winter expeditions were not just about survival, but also played an important role in building Viking culture. Through their travels, the Vikings discovered new lands, establishing colonies and trading goods, which expanded their borders and enriched their cultures, strengthening the sense of community. Winter expeditions were team activities, and this unity in tough times helped strengthen Viking culture. The courage and resilience shown during their travels inspired many generations of Vikings to continue their explorations. Cultural and commercial exchange. By exploring new territories during the harshest months, the Vikings were able to expand their trade routes. Trade with people from the east and south resulted in an exchange of cultures, technologies, and wealth, enriching Viking life and fueling their desire for adventure. These navigation and survival skills during winter allowed the Vikings to remain one of the most feared and respected civilizations of their time. How cold resistance became part of Viking identity. Resistance to extreme cold was a fundamental element of Viking culture. For the Norse people, surviving the freezing winters was not only a matter of physical necessity, but also a reflection of their resilient warrior mentality. From building houses using insulation techniques with wood and moss, to wearing heavy clothing like animal furs and wool, the Vikings developed adaptive practices to endure the low temperatures. Furthermore, resistance to the cold symbolized inner strength, courage, and the ability to face adversity. For the Vikings, winter wasn't just an obstacle to overcome, but a test of endurance that shaped their collective identity. This was reflected in their warrior culture, where surviving the cold became a symbol of bravery. The impact of survival strategies on the modern lifestyle of Nordic populations. The survival strategies developed by the Vikings during the winter left a deep imprint on the modern culture of Nordic populations. Many of the cold adaptation methods are still used today, such as wearing wool clothing and living in well-insulated homes, especially in rural areas of Scandinavia. The navigation and hunting skills, which were essential for survival back then, are also preserved in various Nordic traditions. In addition, The resilience mindset and the connection to nature that the Vikings cultivated still influence modern Nordic society. The populations of Scandinavia are recognized for their high quality of life, focusing on balance between people and nature. The emphasis on being able to survive and thrive in a harsh environment shaped a modern culture of efficiency, minimalism, and, above all, resilience in the face of challenges. The community and cooperation practices during winters also remain relevant. The Vikings often gathered in feasts and banquets to keep morale high, and this tradition of unity during difficult times is reflected in how Nordic countries tackle today's social and economic difficulties. In summary, the Viking legacy of cold resistance not only shaped the culture of their time, but also left a lasting impression on future generations. The ability to overcome adversity, adapt to the environment, and the importance of community unity remain fundamental characteristics of modern Nordic societies. Viking resilience is undoubtedly a cornerstone of Scandinavian identity, influencing the lifestyle and mentality of its people today.